a great discussion, and we're now moving on to our third discussion of the day, and it's a live discussion. And as you can see, got three excellent participants to lead the discussion. Okay, so many of you will be aware that 2020 was going to be a landmark year for those pushing on a net zero future. With world leaders being tasked to update and upgrade their pledges on tackling climate change and emissions targets ahead of COP26. Unfortunately, COVID-19 pandemic has meant the COP26 has been postponed until 2021. But that means there's even greater need for commitments, coalitions, actions to ensure that we are in a good place when the meeting takes place in November 2021. And thankfully, we're already seeing that play out. Only a couple of weeks ago, 995 companies, 449 cities, 38 investors, and 505 universities formed a coalition behind the Race to Zero campaign. And I'm pleased to say that we're now joined by Nigel Topping, UK's high-level climate action champion, UNFCCC, Gonzalo Muñoz, high-level climate action champion of Chile, UNFCCC, and Oliver Balch, independent journalist and long-time contributor to the Ethical Corporation magazine. And they're here to share more information about this campaign, what it means for the next 14 months and more, and also share thoughts as how companies can become part of the action in the build-up to COP26 and beyond. It's a live discussion. They're here to answer some of your questions as the discussion develops. So do get your questions in the Q&A box just beneath the video stream now. But it's my pleasure to hand over the reins to Oliver.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Liam. Really excited about this session. As you said, loads of attention was going into COP26. And when this tragedy of COVID hit, that felt like it could take us off the rails a bit in terms of the momentum behind corporate responses to climate leadership. But it won't. And it won't because there are people like Gonzalo, Muñoz, and Nigel Nigel Topping that are driving this agenda behind the scenes and in front of the scenes here for us today. And they're going to be talking about this campaign that we're going to be hearing a lot about, called the Race to Zero. Both come, I think this is super important to understand, both come from a really strong business background. So they're wearing this hat, this UN hat, as climate action champions, and we'll learn more about what that is. But they can speak to us from experience within the business world. They know what the challenges are that you're facing. They know the arguments that work to win over the board. They know how difficult this is, but how important it is as well for businesses that want prosperous, resilient futures. So, quick intro. I don't think we need a quick intro. I will just say Gonzalo talking to us from Santiago in Chile, where he's been a real driving force of the circular economy and a stakeholder form of capitalism through the B Corp movement. And Nigel Topping was CEO of We Mean Business until very recently, doing wonderful things with renewable energy and with electric vehicles, and before that was with the Carbon Disclosure Project, and before that many years in business, as I say. I think, Gonzalo, you're going to give us a feel and understanding to kick off what this champions, the Climate Action Champions is, and I think, Nigel, you're going to give us an introduction to the Race to Zero campaign. Yeah. Gonzalo, do you want to jump in?
Thank you. Thanks so much, Oliver, and thank you for this event, for giving us the opportunity of explaining and mostly for having a conversation around this fundamental topic of Race to Zero. First, I would like to highlight when did the business environment join the general climate conversation, because for most of people in the world, this is all about parties getting committed and active and acting towards the solution, right? But it formally started for us in the Paris Agreement. So it was in the Paris Agreement when the non-party stakeholders, meaning not only businesses, but subnational regions, cities, investors, civil society, were formally invited to be part of this. And it was through the creation of this agenda that is led by the high-level climate action champions. So we formally appeared at that time. The first high-level champion ever was Laurence Toubiana. Then we had Hakim Al Haite from Morocco, Inia from Fiji, Thomas from Poland, and Nigel and myself. It's the first time that both high-level champions are coming from the private sector. That means something. That means that the business sector is taking a much more proactive role in terms of the solution. And because the role of the champions is all about mobilizing those actors that I mentioned towards the solutions that are required for, of course, the parties to fulfill the Paris Agreement. But then there's another aspect that probably is not that clear for most of the people. Now we're talking about net zero by 2050, the latest, as being like the indication of science towards the world that we need to create that will hopefully not increase the temperature more than 1.5 degrees. Those two data, 1.5 degrees and net zero by 2050, also appeared only 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago. That was in 2018 when the the IPCC report was shown to the world as the general indication of science. So two big elements. The business sector is here not too long, for 5 years in terms of like really formally, and then the indication of when to reach the net zero emissions, the latest, appeared less than 2 years ago. So last year, for the General Assembly Secretary General Summit on Climate in September, with not only the presidency, the incoming presidency of Chile, but also with the support of the UNFCCC and the UNDP, we launched what is called the Climate Ambition Alliance. We put it together, parties and non-party stakeholders all together, willing to be part of the solution and a commitment towards net zero emissions by 2050. And that started, again, less than 1 year ago. We created this general coalition for the first time, incorporating the most ambitious members, state members and non-state members, together with the one common goal. So then we set this general challenge on what Nigel is going to talk about in more detail. But it's important for people to understand that this is changing very rapidly. It's amazing, it's great. Of course, we're now following science. We are following the need of people, citizens all around the world that are expressing themselves. Now, at the same time, parties extended the mandate of the champions for another 5 years. As you say, we have, due to the pandemic, unfortunately, because of the tragedy, but we have another extra year with Nigel to work towards COP26. But we are here to create what is called the ambition loop. The idea is that when parties reach the agreement in Paris, then they set the general framework. Then science told us exactly what is needed. And now it's about non-party stakeholders, about businesses to say, okay, we understood. We now are going to commit, formalize, act. And with that, we are creating the conditions for the parties, for also them to be more ambitious and to increase their commitment. That's what we hear, and that's what is already happening. And it's happening even during COVID times. So that's the general framework that I wanted to highlight. Like, this has been a very short period of time, and there are so many great things happening, even in these critical times.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Gonzalo. Nigel.
Thanks, Oliver. And first of all, thanks, Gonzalo. And for those of you who are like me at 10:20 in the morning, it's kind of hard to believe that Gonzalo's got so much energy at 5:20 in the morning. So thanks for getting up early, Gonzalo. Thanks for all your energy. And you know, actually, as you were talking, I was just remembering that the great systems thinker Donella Meadows, in that sort of seminal article or piece that many of you will know, like Places to Intervene in a System, describes, you know, the different ways in which you can go about systems change. And one of the most powerful is to change the goal of the system. So that's what we're doing here, right? We're collectively, and I know many of the companies who've already been talking, and we'll talk later today, and many of you listening are part of that. We're collectively changing the goal of the system, right? And we're saying that the goal is to, amongst other things, of course, to get to the zero carbon economy as soon as possible. So that's what the Race to Zero is. It's a global campaign that we put together that really, it's an umbrella that wraps together many initiatives that were already in motion. We've worked hard with Oxford University to create some overarching criteria so that all the initiatives which form part of the Race to Zero are credible. That means that businesses, cities, regions, investors, universities, and schools and sports clubs will be joining soon. All have to, publicly make their commitment to net zero as soon as possible. We like dates earlier than 2050. We particularly love some of the dates we've been seeing, like the B Corp companies that have joined are all committing to 2030, which is, that's radical. That's going to drive a lot of innovation. It's very impressive, and Gonzalo's led that. We're seeing growing numbers of universities joining. And the idea is that goal, if pursued resolutely and together, will lead to a healthy, resilient, zero carbon recovery from this current health and economic crisis, and that will make us more resilient to future threats and create decent jobs and unlock inclusive, sustainable growth. And everyone who's in the race is committed to getting to net zero as quickly as they can. And 2050 is the cutoff point. If you're after 2050, you're not in the race, as far as we're concerned. You've decided to go to the I don't know, the second-rate Olympics, or the second team. You can go and you kick around on a Sunday afternoon. You're not really playing with the first team. Liam stole my thunder with most of the numbers, because the numbers that Liam mentioned are all the numbers when we launched on June the 5th. They're all growing, so it's now over 500 cities and over 1,000 businesses and investors with nearly $5 trillion of assets under management and over 500 universities. But let me give you some of the aggregate numbers which show the momentum we've already got. And we're like, what are we now? 15 months away from COP in Glasgow. So every one of these numbers is going to go up resolutely every week. We now have net zero commitments which cover more than half of the global economy. 53% of the global economy is covered by entities that have a commitment to net zero by 2050 at the latest, covering nearly a quarter of global emissions and over a third of the population of the world, 2.6 billion people. So there's a lot of momentum, but you might be forgiven for thinking there's less momentum than that when you listen to some of the news. But that's the power of this kind of multi-stakeholder approach. So it's companies, investors, national governments, regional governments. Some regional governments are pretty big. California, right, 5th biggest economy in the world, net zero 2045, and they're all driving the kind of investment decisions that we're seeing from companies who are committed to net zero. And within the broader Climate Ambition Alliance, which includes the countries, there are over 120 countries so far committed to net zero by 2050. Not some of the biggest economies yet. We're still hopeful we'll get a few of those in. Our goal, working with that whole coalition, is to get well beyond 70% of the world economy covered by net zero commitments by the time we get to COP. Already since the Madrid COP to the launch, we saw a 70% increase in the number of commitments. Let me just add something about why we call it a race. There's multiple reasons. One is that it really is a race against time. I like to say to people, don't spend too much time reading the science of how bad things could get, but do spend a bit of time. And as Gonzalo said, the clarity of the IPCC report of just how much human suffering and economic damage will be caused for every 0.1% and every year that we go beyond what's possible. So it really is a race to minimize. We can't stop now, to minimize economic and human damage. It's also a race that we win or lose together. So unlike a lot of races, right, this really is a race where our chances of success are much greater the more people who are in. Of course, we also use the race in the competitive sense, right? Because with the sort of systems dynamics now of the ambition loop, as Gonzalo describes, the more businesses commit to buying 100% renewable energy, say, the more companies commit to reducing or eliminating coal from their generation portfolio, the more countries commit to net zero, the faster that goes round and round. We see that in many areas. We see that in renewables, we're seeing it in storage, we're seeing it in EVs. I remember, just after Paris, people were thinking EVs, there will be something that really take over in the 2060s or 2070s. Now we all know it's game over in the 2030s. You might have seen Shell just a couple of weeks ago saying their formal position on their public policy recommendation is that a banning of combustion engines in 2030. An oil company saying that it wants to eliminate its market by 2030 because they know it's coming and they want clarity for their capex, which every business wants. I don't want to bet into uncertainty. So very much at the heart of the race to zero, as we get more granular. So this is the umbrella. We're now working at a sectoral level with many partners, from Women Business to the Rocky Mountain Institute to WEF to the Energy Transitions Commission, the cities organisations like C40 and ICLEI, investor groups like the PRI and the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance and Investor Agenda. We're working on these net zero pathways per sector, nearly all of which have a technology S-curve at the heart of them. So the last point I want to make is if you're on a race to zero in industrial transition, industrial disruption, we know the shape of the racetrack. It's an S-curve, right? So if you're running on a straight track, you're off track. If you think this is going to happen incrementally, you're going to lose. So if you don't join the race to zero and embrace the exponential nature of change, you're actually deciding to lose as a company, as an investor, as a country. So we all need to be in together, but those who choose not to join are actually choosing to lose the race individually. So I encourage everybody who's listening, if you haven't joined, join now. If you've already joined and said you'll be net zero 2050, go back and be more ambitious and say 2045. If you've joined but your suppliers haven't, tell them it's going to be a requirement to sell to you within the next few years that they commit. There's lots of information. You can just Google Race to Zero. You'll find the website and find all the information. If you're a business, because it's working with Women Business in the Science Based Targets Initiative, or going further and joining the Amazon Pledge for 2040 or earlier, we're working with the B Corps. Are all, Gonzalo's trying to get every single B Corp in the world to join. We're working with the ICC to make it easier with Exponential Roadmap for SMEs to join. So looking forward to the questions and the conversation, Oliver. But the basic message is everyone's got to join. If you choose not to join, you're a loser.
And presume, I mean, if some people lose, everyone loses, right? Even if you're on a winning track, we need everyone on board, because otherwise the system won't shift. I guess, let me put my skeptics hat on, or not skeptics hat, but just kind of busy executives hat. Let's say I've signed up, I've fought the battle internally to say net zero is the way we've got to go. It's the only option on the table. Here's how we're going to do it. And then you come knocking on my door saying, come and join our UN initiative. It's like, no, I've got enough on my plate. We're doing net zero here. We're driving it through our own supply chain as best as we can, not just our own operations, and forward to our consumers. And what's in it for me to have to sign up to another, umbrella initiative? What do you say?
Well, first, it's weird to set your own targets, your own methodology, your own mechanism of integration. And we're not creating something new in terms of a new track. We're putting all together the different initiatives. As Nigel said, we're working with different, like, for example, when it comes to business, not only the B Corp, but of course the UN Global Compact. We're working with the B Team. We're working with the Fashion Charter. All of them have a very concrete campaigns that are aggregated into this one big umbrella campaign that are putting together businesses with other non-party stakeholders. That has never happened. So if you want to be a Lonely Ranger, sure, you can always be one. But first, you're missing the possibility of having a common narrative with all of the rest. You're missing the possibility of learning so much of what is being developed through the methodology that Nigel described. So just having that capacity of putting together different actors, all of them with common, not only narrative, but methodology, that is unique, and that is the power of nature. But at the same time, this will require collaboration in between different actors. So I mean, you're not going to solve all of your topics around climate by your own. You will require clients, and you will require providers. You will require an ecosystem around you that is also committed. And through Race to Zero, we're offering that connections. So at the end, it's not only about one big multinational saying, yeah, I will do this. When they say it, they're sending a marvelous message for all of their value change to say, we need all of you also committed. And the way that they can commit is by joining through the different platforms that are being offered around Race to Zero in order to join. So at the end, is something that, as Nigel said, we're going to win this all together, because we're going to be not only deciding what to do alone, but we're going to decide this as a common activity and something that we will do all together, integrated.
Great. Let me clarify the question, because I suspect that a lot of your 1,000+ businesses that have signed up are already members of RE100 and Science-Based Targets Initiative. It's this non-state actors other than business that I think is where this alliance is so exciting and different. But it also makes me super nervous. I'm used to working with other industry people. They speak my language. I don't know what a mayor's agenda is. I'm a bit sus about some of the charities that are in this space. We don't want to take a strong political position, but that's essentially what I'll be doing if I join up to your alliance. So
I mean, Oliver, I think you misread CEOs really badly there. Look, a lot of cities is a massive market. If you're making cars, anything to do with construction, anything to do with consumer goods, all right, most people in the world live in cities. Mayors are very important in terms of shaping the market of the future. Investors, they own you, all right? If you're a listed company, they're pretty important. You're getting messages from investors. You know, it's kind of like in ESG management 101 is make sure investors know you've joined the race to zero. As we've said, via one of the initiatives that you're already familiar with, right? So via science-based targets or whatever. I think, and to your question, I'm kind of surprised really. Your question, what's in it for me? I mean, I got two answers to that question. One is that's a very 1980s question, right? When people still had this illusion that, you know, that the companies were perhaps islands. And if so, somebody asking that question, I think is kind of missing the plot of all the things that are changing so fast in terms of the whole ESG movement, the whole governance movement that Gonzalo's been leading, the kind of shared value agenda, the realization that if you want to attract talent, right, you better be on top of these agendas, because brilliant 21-year-olds are not going to join a company that's saying, I don't care about climate, I'm just profit maximizing.
Yeah, but I don't think you don't need to repeat the business case. We're all on board with that. We're all trying to do
I thought you were questioning it by saying, what's in it?
I say, what's in to join your alliance? What practically can I do different as a member of the alliance than I can by already having these relationships with my local mayor, with whatever? You know, what will being a member of alliance, what doors will it open, help me do my job of realizing my net zero?
If you've already committed to net zero through the Science-Based Targets Initiative, it won't make much difference because you're already in. Thank you.
Cool. So 1,000 businesses, how are we going to get that to 10,000? It's great that California has signed up, but there's hundreds of thousands of companies in California that aren't necessarily most of them don't have net zero targets. So what's the way of kind of reeling them in and getting them on board?
Well, we are developing different, let's say, sub-campaigns. So in some cases, we're developing the capacity of reaching very particular industries. So I will allow Nigel to speak of one of the ones that we like the best is the end of the internal combustion engine, and how much of that is touching so many different industries and setting the new conditions for everybody that is related to now the transport has to connect to that. But also, as I said, we are now focusing a lot on developing the conditions for having value chains that are all speaking the same language. So in this moment, I would say we have mostly two different types of animals, right? The big multinationals that have been in this arena for quite a long time and has been, in so many cases, the leaders that are moving the needle. But now we also incorporated, for example, through the B Corps, many SMEs around the world, all of them with high commitments in terms of not only climate, but also in general environmental and social commitment. Now we're trying to reach millions of SMEs around the world through the International Chamber of Commerce. We're willing to deploy this campaign in different areas of the world, meaning much more from the global south. We're willing to generate in this next 15 months a lot of momentum, bringing what we call the unusual suspects, right? And through that, showing how much the ambition loop is not only generated through the commitment from non-state actors, shown to the parties, but at the same time, an ambition loop in the value chain. So when a company commits, immediately sets a fantastic message to their value chain, to their providers, and also to the clients, but also, as Nigel said, to their communities. First internally, right, to their employees, but at the same time, we have seen this growth in numbers, mostly in the business community and in the cities, because majors and CEOs have a capability of listening to what's happening in the street and acting much more rapidly than other stakeholders. And therefore, we have to use that power to take into consideration the needs of citizens all around the world to be reflected in their local leadership, but also in how do they relate with the market through companies that are committed and throwing values in their actions.
Gonzalo, just one clarification. This has come through on our chat, and please do keep on sending those. That's where SMEs fit in this whole picture. Is this alliance really a big boys game, and then you're hoping it will spread down through their supply chains, as you've just been explaining, or is there a place for SMEs to join in more directly under their own steam?
Well, maybe I'll answer that. I think absolutely there's a place for SMEs to join directly. As Gonzalo says, we're working with the International Chamber of Commerce, who of course have 45 million members worldwide, who are nearly all SMEs, and with Exponential Roadmap, who've done a lot of brilliant work showing the sort of solution pathways for different sectors and working out of Stockholm. And so they'll be launching some of the toolkits for SMEs soon. Of course, we're also partnering with the Amazon Pledge. There's a lot of SMEs supply Amazon or use Amazon as a platform, and so there'll also be some tools and some ways for SMEs to engage, which are tailored for a kind of simpler approach than maybe you'd expect from a Procter & Gamble, right? With the sort of sophisticated tools and resources that someone like Virginie, who I know was on earlier, has got at their disposal. So absolutely, I think historically, and this is something that Gonzalo has brought. My work at Women in Business, we're really focused just on the big multinational corporations, but we know that the majority of innovation, the majority of jobs, the majority of growth is actually generated by SMEs who are often more agile, right? And this is a game of disruption. So we really want to have that agility and that innovation engine from SMEs on board. So Gonzalo and I are hoping that by Glasgow we might have as many as 1 million SMEs committed to net zero.
And our target, Oliver, sorry, but our first target was to increase by 10 times the number of non-party stakeholders committed at COP25 in Madrid last December, to increase that 10 times towards COP26. We really feel that number will be very short, and hopefully, as Nigel said, we will increase the number that exponentially and show that in this case, it's also about an amazing S-curve. Yeah.
I've got a question here from Asif, and I don't know whether he's sitting within a company or outside one, but the question is valid on both parts. I'm sure the question's being asked, who's going to hold these companies to account? What happens if I sign up to your alliance and I don't achieve the targets that we've set out for ourselves? Is there someone monitoring this? Do we just go, well, you tried your best, we're all fried anyway? What's your response to that query?
Well, one very concrete and practical one is that in order for you to join, you have to do what we call the 4 Ps. You have to pledge, plan, proceed, and publish. So those are the 4 general conditions for businesses to join. Let me be then very transparent, being a businessman myself. So the first, when you're running a publicly traded company, sure, you are all the time scrutinized and check whether your commitments are for real or not, and that is reflected most of the times in the value of the stocks. But I would say most of the scrutiny is coming from your team. As Nigel said, that talent that you will require to attract and many times you're willing to retain is one that is asking for you to be honest on the values that you're putting into your business. And that is now being reflected at the same time, not only to the society around you, but at the same time, in many cases, through your consumers or your customers. And now we have been seeing an amazing and fantastic change in the investors' agenda. and that is putting a pressure, independently of whether you're a publicly traded company or you're a SME, a startup. You're going to be asked to be honest on what is your position around such a fundamental topic, and therefore act properly regarding that.
I mean, I guess to add on, I remember in the 90s when I was running a factory in Manchester, and I was an enthusiastic young factory manager, and went about getting ISO 14001 accreditation, environmental management systems. So I made a commitment to get that accreditation. Who was holding me accountable? To be honest, when I did that, I was ahead of the company, so my bosses weren't really holding me accountable. They were kind of like, he's the sort of slightly odd, environmentally conscious factory manager. We don't have many of those. My staff weren't. They were, old school manufacturing workers in Manchester. But interestingly, customers started to pay attention. I can remember when we had a visit from Volvo. I used to make 100% of the brake linings for Volvo trucks there. And they were like, oh yeah, that's interesting. We're starting to look at that. Then the next year they come back and they say, oh yeah, we've decided that we're going to ask all of our suppliers when they're going to get ISO 14001 accreditation. And a couple of years later, they're like, oh, we've decided to make it mandatory. And if you haven't embarked on the path, we're worried about why we're doing business with you. And within 3 years, if you haven't got it, then we won't do business with you. So to ask this question, there are many ways of holding people accountable that are not legal, right? There's the kind of maybe the moral one of the next generation of employees. There's the contractual one of the customer. There's the expectations and engagement one of investors, and all of these forces are lining up around zero before 2050. And of course, if you're a business in the UK or Europe, and if you're an SME and you only work in the UK and Europe, actually this is a compliance requirement already, right? So you may not be breaking the law in terms of the way that ASSI puts the question, but you won't be doing business.
Yeah.
So there's different ways of holding people accountable. I think it's quite important.
And I think that segues us in nicely to your the end of this 15-month process, which is the political piece, isn't it? It's all these heads of state will be meeting in Glasgow to discuss how we're going to move forward with the Paris commitments. And this notion of ambition loop that you came up with, that you cited at the beginning, it's almost counterintuitive, and it feels it answers this accountability question. It's business and non-state actors holding states to account, by the sounds of it. No, look, we're committed to this. We want you to be as well. What advice or what strategy do you have under the alliance to mobilize these voices, these non-state actors, to make that message loud and clear, to sell it to the skeptics, the Bolsonaros and Trumps that are sitting around the table, or won't be sitting around that particular table perhaps, but those that need convincing? How can your alliance, those members, and particularly business members within it, make that case loud and clear?
Well, first it's important again to understand that we are here, meaning Nigel and myself, because the parties gave us a mandate. Okay, it's the 197 parties who named us and allowed us to do this work, and of course the expectation is that this is being reflected in the increase of their ambition in all the process that now has been delayed for next year. But we have very concrete moments from now to Glasgow that hopefully will allow us to show an expression of the ambition loop. So one that is very concrete is the enhancement of the NDCs. So we expect that we will have from now to Glasgow more countries saying, okay, we understood, we're seeing how much of this is changing, we're seeing those transformations in so many industries, and it will be even fool from us not to move ourselves around that. But then even the recovery plans should be in many countries an expression of this. So we're expecting that through our work, we're going to be able to show countries how much of the solutions that we are seeing in the ground, not only through businesses, but as we said, through investors, through universities, through majors that are needing to be part of the solution and needing to be part of this evolution and creation of this green, resilient, healthier world that can be also expressed in recovery plans, as we are already seeing some. And at the end, all of that should be accelerated towards toward Glasgow. But let me be honest, I mean, this is changing so rapidly that we don't have all the information of how the world would look like in not only 1 year ahead, a few weeks ahead. The world is changing so rapidly. So we are there to also capture that, that not only enthusiasm, but all of those actions that are happening in the ground to make it visible for the parties. We describe ourselves as a bridge between the non-party stakeholders and the parties, and having the capability of showing the parties that this is all happening.
Maybe I just add a couple of things there. First of all, I just want to make sure that I think you mischaracterized the ambition loop. It's not about business pushing government alone. It's a loop, right? So it's a dynamic feedback loop. And of course, we massively simplify because it's investors pushing businesses, pushing cities, pushing governments, who themselves then change the rules of the game. I just want to make sure everyone's clear. We're not saying this is not business saves the world. It's like everybody influences everybody in a race to the top. And let me just give you 3 examples of where leadership can come from different places in the loop, in the area that I'm particularly obsessed with, which is the end of the iconic technology of the fossil fuel age, the combustion engine. If you look at cars, actually the leadership is coming from governments and cities. You know, you see Paris banning in 2030. You see the UK bringing the biggest economy yet. It's going to bring its state forward to somewhere between 2032 and 2035 from a full ban from 2040, still allowing hybrids. So that's a big deal, and that's faster than any of the incumbents. Of course, Tesla as a disruptor is committed to zero from the beginning. But if you look at buses, it's the fleet operators. You might have seen recently in the UK, First Bus and National Express, as far as I can tell, basically said we've already bought our last diesel bus. We're going to have our whole fleet's going to be electrified, either batteries or fuel cells by 2030 or 2035. Whereas if you look at trucks, it's the manufacturers. You know, Daimler have said net zero 2039 trucks in Europe, and there's no legislator said that yet. So just to make the point that there's different ways into the ambition loop. But if the truck manufacturer, you know, they're now partnering with Volvo, that between them that kind of dominates the European truck market. So it becomes very easy for a legislator in Europe to now say, oh, Volvo and Daimler are going net zero 2039. It's kind of a low or zero risk policy strategy, right, to match that. Or maybe you up it a bit, you ratchet each time you go around the loop. So maybe we'd like to see some legislators say, oh, we'll take your 2039 and we'll raise you to 2035, as it were.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to know what your position is with industry associations. I mean, the real world out there, we know that there are counter arguments going on. There are lobby groups from industry that don't buy this message, that are undermining it. What would you like your alliance members within the business community to be doing to counter that, check it off? What's the position that a business can take to ensure that the right messages are coming out from these powerful industry groups and not the wrong ones?
Well, I would say that we have been protagonists of so many radical changes, and all industries are being disrupted so rapidly that that even I would say I would empathize with those that are feeling the fear of change. Sure, that's probably part of human nature, but that's assumption of being, I mean, losing this race and shutting your activities. I don't see that as and again, just speaking on a very concrete vision of what businesses are looking in all of the countries where we have capacity of reaching. In every sector, there's been very rapid and dramatic disruption, because we're talking about and I'm not talking about only climate. Let me phrase it back. It's about not only climate, it's about also inequality. Those two big major topics are being a great force of disruption in all of the industries that I know. And therefore, my invitation for any of those business leaders is to really check around them, not only the risk of not acting, but the opportunities that are being offered in terms of innovation. And in that sense, understanding that maybe for the last decades, we have been preparing ourselves, speaking about innovation, speaking about increase of technology capacity, everything that we've been speaking about for the last probably 2 decades is bringing us to this moment when even COVID is offering an opportunity of doing with the world what COVID did to us, change rapidly and start again.
And I mean, Gonzalo talks about the key of innovation is, I think one of the real challenges for industry bodies, if we're honest, you know, trade bodies perform a function of creating a unified voice amongst a group of companies who share a lot of interest in a sector, but they're speaking on many different things. And so sometimes climate change might be right at the top, like if you're if oil industry or power utilities now, right? But if you're a consumer goods, then climate change might not be, you know, you might be worried about Sunday trading, about food labeling, about all sorts of things. So there's a challenge of focus there. I also think that trade bodies normally do a really good job in stable times when we're talking about incremental policy changes. So a bit of improvement in health and safety, a bit of improvement in energy efficiency. But I think the world can see that trade bodies are just not equipped to support their industries through disruption, because their role in stable times, they often act to slow down the rate of change. I give remarks from my industry. I was in the factory that I ran in Manchester that I talked about earlier. We were still using asbestos in the 90s as one of the components for brake linings for trucks. We were using it in very controlled conditions because we were very aware of the danger, but it got outlawed, I think in 99, something like that. And the engineers who were used to using it and the whole industry was trying to slow that down because they were like, we don't know what to do without it. It's a perfect material. Of course, as soon as it was banned, the same engineers who didn't want to lose it as a great material found ways to make cheaper, more durable, safer, healthier alternatives. It was kind of the push that they needed. I think we see time and again, actually in disruptive times, trade bodies are acting against the interests of their industry. I'll give you a really concrete example for right now. The automotive industries is on this exponential beginning of this rapid transformation to 100% electric vehicles in the next 10, 15 years. If you look at the way that the Auto Manufacturers Organization in the States has been engaging with this topic in the last year, it's been colluding with a Trump administration and an EPA, which has been actively trying to slow down that transition by rolling back regulation. It's a kind of a King Canute play against the economic and technical and climate science inevitability of that transition. And Detroit cannot dictate the world market. It couldn't in the 70s when the oil crisis said the world's really going to want more efficient cars, and Detroit said no, we're you know, it's a seller's market. We're going to make big cars. Half of the cars on American roads now are more efficient European or East Asian models. China is the biggest car market in the world. Europe's a huge market. Those two markets are accelerating towards the electric future. If America doesn't flip soon, and that trade body is part of the reason for that, it will only have itself to blame when Detroit is once again scarred with empty automotive factories.
Great.
Let me use another example. That listening to Nigel, it came to my mind. Plastics, single-use plastics. So you can identify some trade associations that has been resisting that change for the last 10, 15 years. And some of them saying, no, this is important. This is something that is global. This is something that will connect me to sometimes my municipality. This is something that will give me another extra value to connect to my consumers or users. But at the end, this is a massive opportunity. So you can see those who were resisting and fighting back against those that were absolutely going front and saying, yeah, I mean, this is a problem that it's evident. Let's go forward and let's be part of the solution.
I'm conscious we're coming to our last few minutes. It's been great. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you a couple of yes/no questions from what's come in on the chat. coming back to your pledge, plan, proceed, publish taxonomy, pledge. If I'm a museum, this is a question that's come in, can I pledge? Can I join the alliance? What does non-state actor mean, basically? Is it anyone and everyone?
I would say yes. I don't know if we have the current methodology, but we can deploy that. We can let's develop that. Good one. Love it.
And the second question, the second question was on the plan piece. To sign up, do I have to also sign up to other initiatives, in particular the science-based SBTI, Science-Based Transparency Initiative?
You can only join the Race to Zero via one of the accredited initiatives.
Which are then?
Well, they're all on the website. If you're a business, it's the Business Ambition for 1.5 pledge, which requires a net zero science-based target, or the B Corp route, or the Amazon pledge, which itself requires a science-based target by 2041, or the ICC SME route coming soon.
Or fashion chapter, or the B team.
Lots. And just clarify, so I'm sure if I press in Race to Zero in a search engine, it'll come up, but what's the website?
I'll have to Google it. Let me just...
It'll come up, don't worry. Okay.
UNFCCC.int. And in there you have Race to Zero as one of them. But if you Google UNFCCC and Race to Zero, that will take you to the webpage.
Cool. And this
you have all of the assets, all of the information is there.
Great. Well, hopefully we've infused our listeners today to go and have a listen. One last question. That's around the fourth of your P's. So pledge, plan, proceed, publish. You mentioned right on the offset, one of the advantages of signing up to the Alliance is to have a common narrative. Is the publish piece, in order to make that common narrative, it needs to be more than just, here's my data, this is our performance data, this is how we expect that. It can be more robust perhaps, but we expect that kind of data. Investors are asking for it. How do you, in the communications piece, what's that common narrative look like? How do I go about contributing to it if I'm a business in comms?
I think that, the common narrative is one of systems transformation, right? It's not I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do alone. It's like our world is changing in response to what we've learned from the science of climate change, which is changing consumer expectations, employee expectations, the legal framework within which we operate, the investor expectations. That's driving investments in innovation, as Gonzalo says, and we're on that curve to develop and deploy that innovation exponentially to solve the problem together. And it's complicated, right? It's disruption is not easy. But so increasingly, we like to try and tell the story not of just individual companies, which is always interesting, but also of whole sectors or whole segments of the economy that are transitioning.
And do you have a methodology for that?
For telling stories?
For systems change.
Yeah, we do. We have a very, very, very simple way of just mapping all the main levers along the value chain. So along the value chain, supply side, demand side, technology, and around it, policy at the national and local level, investors, trade bodies, we mentioned earlier, civil society, labor organizations, employees, and then working with a really big community of partners. It's called the Marrakesh Partnership. It was launched in the COP after Paris in Marrakesh. So we work with all of those partners. So they're really the partners that many of the businesses here know really well. In the business community, it's We Mean Business, it's the World Business Council, it's CDP, it's the Climate Group, etc.
Went to our last couple of minutes.
Sorry, Leon, and when it comes to communication, this is also something that is dynamic, and we're learning and we're trying and we're improving. So in that aspect, of course, we have to even learn how to communicate this in a better way for parties, but also to reach citizens all around the world to also get committed and engaged with the idea of being part of Race to Zero in so many different ways.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much. We only have, my sole job actually is to make sure we finish on time and to have you explain this exciting Race to Zero, which you've done supremely well. It's my job to finish on time. Can I ask two last questions and 20 seconds each? One of you, what's the biggest challenge you anticipate in the next 15 months? And the other, what are you most excited about in the next 15 months?
Well, excitement, those million SMEs. Come from the challenge.
Yeah, I think they're kind of the same. It's because we're finding that we're increasingly being asked in our role as a bridge, if you like, between the parties, the countries who are part of the UN Convention, and the non-parties, the businesses, the cities. And we're increasingly being asked to proactively form that bridge. So I think the thing that I'm most excited about, but is the most challenging, is to help sectoral ministers, ministers of transport, ministers of energy, ministers of agriculture around the world plug into the momentum that is evidently building from the non-state actor community, and give them the confidence that they can work on that to form that ambition loop that we talked about. Because often it's a translation question, because we're talking about very different languages sometimes.
Great. Well, let the race begin.
It's already begun.
Thank you, Oliver. Yeah.
Thank you, Oliver. Thanks, Nigel.
Thank you, Oliver, Nigel, and Gonzalo. What a great discussion. And anyone that wants to find out more information, someone's kindly posted it into the Q&A box, which can be seen, and my team have tagged it to the top. So do visit that, see how you can get involved. As Gonzalo kindly said there, the race has begun. So do get involved and join it. And thank you again to all three of you for joining us and sharing that great work, and Oliver for chairing the discussion and bringing it to close. So that's
Bye.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Gonzalo, and all the very best to all three of you.